They used my house to impress the rich, but I changed the locks before the party. It was the kind of sentence that only made full sense after everything had already unraveled. A quiet declaration, not loud, not angry, just final. That's how I remember it now, sitting on the porch of a much older, smaller home on the quieter edge of Charleston, sipping tea and watching the sunlight filter through moss-covered oaks. But 2 months ago, that version of me, the one who calmly changed the locks, didn't exist. Back then, I was still trying to earn my place inside a family that had already replaced me in every frame. My name is Lana Del Rey, and I'm a 39-year-old architect and interior designer. I run my own firm, mostly boutique restoration projects for historic homes. People in this city call me intense, quiet, meticulous. My clients trust me because I don't just decorate, I listen. I map out who they are and shape the space around that truth. Ironically, I never had a space that truly reflected who I was. Not until I bought that house near King Street, a 3-story Georgian revival that I restored with my own hands, detail by detail. For 5 years, every door frame, every custom cabinet, every light fixture was a piece of me. And yet, to my family, it was just a prop. It started with an envelope, heavy, thick cardstock with gold trim. My name was spelled in faint calligraphy, and I already knew before I opened it what it was: an invitation to my sister Aubrey's engagement party. The real surprise came when I read the venue, my home, printed in bold under the date and time, without so much as a text or a phone call to ask. I blinked, reread it, and held the envelope at arm's length, as if distance would make it make sense. It didn't. What it did was trigger that old familiar ache in my chest, the one I'd grown used to suppressing. The phone call came hours later, just before sunset, as I was polishing the walnut trim along my entryway. "Darling, your place is just perfect." My mother's voice trilled through the speaker with that practiced softness that only appeared when she wanted something. The windows, the flow it'll photograph beautifully. Eleanor was positively glowing about it at lunch. She says it feels like a campaign ad. My hand froze mid-motion. "Mother," I said slowly, "when exactly were you planning to ask me if you could use my house for a 300-person event?" She laughed, like I'd made a joke. "Oh, Lana, don't be difficult. It's your sister's big day. You're always saying you don't use the space for entertaining anyway." She continued, undeterred by my silence. "Cassian's family is flying in from D.C. His father might be tapped for the next Treasury post, and we simply cannot risk a cramped country club setup. Your home gives the right impression, classy, understated, but impressive. It says we belong." I stood in the doorway, staring at my reflection in the antique mirror I had salvaged from an estate sale in Savannah. I didn't agree to this. I replied, "That house is my home, my sanctuary, not a social stunt." She didn't answer directly. "We've already sent the invitations," she said after a pause. "It would be awfully embarrassing for Aubrey if anything changed now." I ended the call without saying goodbye. Later that evening, Harper came over. She had been my best friend since architecture school, the only person who truly knew the difference between how I presented myself and how I actually felt. She brought over those sea salt caramels I always pretended not to like. I told her everything: the invitation, the call, the pressure, and the worst part, how unsurprised I was by all of it. "They've always done this," I whispered, taken what's mine and dressed it up like it was theirs to begin with. Harper didn't say much, just looked around at the house she'd watched me build room by room, then said, So what are you going to do? I didn't have an answer yet, but something inside me shifted that night. A soft click, like the sound of a deadbolt turning, not rage, not sadness, just something final forming in the distance. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel afraid of it. The next morning, I found a stranger on my porch, measuring the front steps with a clipboard in hand. She introduced herself as the lead coordinator for the engagement party. Her tone was bright and confident, the kind people use when they assume everyone is already on board. I didn't say anything at first, just stood there in my robe, holding a cup of coffee that had already gone cold. She started talking about floral arches, custom lighting, valet logistics, and which areas of my yard would be best for cocktail hour. I stopped her mid-sentence. Who gave you permission to come here? Her expression didn't falter. Your mother said you'd be expecting us. I shut the door without another word. That afternoon, I drove to the storage facility on Bay Street and opened a new climate-controlled unit under Harper's name. I didn't bring much at first, just a few things I didn't want anyone touching. My grandfather's drafting tools, the antique mirror from my first design project, a pair of sketches from an artist I once mentored, now framed in gold leaf. I stood inside that metal box for longer than I should have, looking at those pieces like they might say something back. They didn't, but they reminded me who I was before I started editing myself to keep the peace. The following days blurred into each other. Aubrey texted daily with lists of things to move or change. The mantle needs to be cleared for the photographer. Mom says your hallway is too dark for the welcome photos. Cassian's mother is requesting white orchids only, not lilies. They're bad luck. I stopped responding. I didn't have the energy to argue anymore. And yet, every message felt like another hand reaching into my ribcage to rearrange the furniture of my life without asking if it even belonged to them. The house I had built as an extension of my independence had become, in their minds, a curated gallery they could walk guests through like a showroom. My name was on the deed. My name was never on the invitation. A few evenings later, Harper and I sat on my back steps, sharing a bottle of wine that was probably too expensive to drink without occasion. The sun dipped behind the trees, casting long shadows over the brick patio I had laid by hand. She noticed the folders stacked beside me: permits, contracts, appraisals. You're not just venting this time. Are you? She asked. You're actually going to do something. I nodded slowly. I contacted a broker, off-market listing, very quiet. I just want to know what my options are. She didn't ask why. She already knew. And then she said something that stayed with me longer than it should have. You know what's crazy? If you sell, they'll say you're being petty. But if you stay and let them use you, they'll call you supportive. Either way, they'll rewrite the story to suit themselves. It wasn't until the following Sunday that things crystallized. We had the usual family dinner at my parents' estate, the kind where the table was always too long and the conversation too shallow. Eleanor poured wine like a priest offering communion, her compliments always laced with mild corrections. My father talked mostly about Cassian's career trajectory, pausing only to suggest I consider applying to a university faculty position for more stability. Aubrey chimed in halfway through the meal, asking if I'd removed the odd abstract piece from the dining room wall yet. It doesn't fit the theme, she said, as if the space had never been mine. I excused myself early and stepped out into the garden. The night was quiet except for the sound of insects and distant traffic. I pulled out my phone and reread an email I had received that morning from Miles Bennett, the real estate agent. Property values in your area are excellent. I have a few buyers who are looking for something just like your home if you're serious. We can talk timeline. I read it 3 times, then opened my calendar. The party was 3 weeks away. If I moved quickly, it could be done. If I moved quietly, it would be mine again, even if just for a moment. The decision wasn't made in a burst of emotion. It didn't come from a place of vengeance or spite. It came in layers, a slow unfolding of truth. I realized I had been negotiating my own boundaries for years without ever calling it that, letting them blur lines, rewrite rules, define my silence as compliance. And this time, I wasn't going to fight. I was going to walk away before they even realized the floor beneath them was shifting. Quiet doesn't always mean weak. Sometimes it just means calculated. I didn't tell anyone right away. That was the most important part. Silence was my shield. In a family like mine, information was currency, and once you gave it away, it was used either as leverage or decoration. I needed both my privacy and my control intact. Miles and I met discreetly the next morning at a quiet cafe 2 neighborhoods away. He looked younger than I expected, but carried himself with the alert confidence of someone who understood more than he let on. I handed him the file I had prepared: property records, renovation documentation, appraisals, energy-efficient certifications, every bit of proof that the house was mine entirely, paid for by contracts I earned, not gifts I received. He scanned the folder with careful eyes, then glanced at me. "You don't want this on the public market," he said. More statement than question. I nodded. I don't want signs. I don't want visits. I don't want whispers circling my mother's charity board before the ink dries. He smiled slightly, then leaned forward. "There are private channels. I'll make calls this afternoon." I slid over one more envelope. It held 3 photos of the house staged exactly as it was. Not styled for sale, just honest. Don't dress it up. Don't overpromise. The right buyer will see through all that. Miles tucked the envelope under his notebook. "I'll handle it quietly," he said. By the time I got back home, the second team of florists had already arrived. This time, it wasn't just someone measuring spaces. They were bringing samples. Giant buckets of white hydrangeas and eucalyptus lined my walkway like a prelude to invasion. One of the women, wearing a headset and designer flats, waved at me without stopping her phone call. "We're staging the main living room today," she said cheerfully. "The Garretts are asking about the lighting for golden hour photos. Do you know your curtain measurements?" I didn't answer. I didn't go inside either. I simply turned back around, got in my car, and drove to the warehouse where I'd ordered my custom chandelier 2 years ago. It had been a splurge at the time, something no one else had. I remembered spending weeks choosing the right metal finish, the perfect balance of vintage and modern. I still had the invoice and sketches. When I returned home later that day, I removed it myself, piece by piece, storing it in a foam-lined crate. They wanted to host their party under that light, take their family portraits beneath something they'd always dismissed as too industrial. Not anymore. That night, Harper and I boxed up more artwork, carefully removing each piece before the next wave of strangers could come in and decide what did or didn't match the aesthetic. The messages from Aubrey became more demanding. She asked for layout drawings, lighting specs, pantry inventory. She claimed the photographer needed to know the wall paint codes. "You're being difficult," she wrote. "Can't you just be excited for me for once?" I didn't reply. The silence made her escalate. "Mom says you're ruining everything." She texted a day later. Cassian's family is starting to ask questions. They're thinking maybe we should just do the wedding there too. You don't mind, do you? That's when I realized something simple and brutal. I wasn't just being used. I was being erased. Every boundary I had set was treated as a suggestion. Every protest folded into their narrative of me being cold or difficult or jealous. I printed out a photo of myself taken 3 years ago in that house, right after I finished the final renovation. I had been barefoot, holding a mug of coffee at sunrise, the windows glowing behind me. It was quiet, no guests, no catering, no expectations, just light, space, and peace. I kept that photo in my office drawer and stared at it that night before calling Miles. Let's move forward, I said. Show it to your best clients. But I want it closed before the 19th. That's non-negotiable. He didn't hesitate. Understood. I'll draw up the terms. As the week went on, the energy in the house changed. I started packing with more precision, labeling boxes by memory rather than category. I only took what mattered, things that carried stories or weight or fingerprints no one else recognized. The rest, I left where it was. Let them believe the house was still theirs to shape. Let them think I was too overwhelmed to fight. There was a certain power in watching people decorate a stage that was quietly slipping out from under them. Harper called it performance art. I called it clarity. By Friday, the first offer had come in. Miles sent me a text just before midnight, attached to a screenshot of a bank-approved letter. It was over asking price, no contingencies, private closing in 2 weeks. I stared at the screen for a long time, not because I was surprised, but because I wasn't. The house had value. The problem was that until now, I was the only one who believed that without needing permission. The second offer came the next morning, just after I finished rearranging the bookshelves to look undisturbed. It was slightly higher, cash, with a flexible close date. I told Miles I'd wait 2 more days, but I already knew I was going to accept one of them. The sale wasn't just about money or space. It was a quiet exhale after years of breath holding. And in the background, the machine kept moving. Aubrey sent another message around noon, something about staging options for the foyer and whether she could install a temporary floral wall. I didn't answer. My mother followed up 2 hours later with a long voicemail I didn't bother to play. Then came the party planner, asking for access to the garage so she could map out valet flow. I forwarded the message to Harper with a single caption, "They still don't know." That night, we sat in my office surrounded by labeled boxes and sealed crates. I had already moved most of the personal things to the storage unit, but I left just enough to maintain the illusion. The home still looked lived in. The colors still matched. The shelves still held books. If someone walked in, they wouldn't guess that the foundation had already been signed away. Harper watched me open the security app on my phone. I had installed new cameras the week before, not for safety, for evidence. She leaned in and watched as a recorded clip played silently, my mother walking in with the planner, gesturing toward the staircase, talking as if she owned the air in every room. "She said you'd be at work," Harper whispered. "She's always said that," I replied. The next few days followed a rhythm I hadn't expected. They sent in people to measure, photograph, inspect, critique. One day it was the lighting team. The next it was catering. I didn't fight them. I didn't push back. I documented. Every unsanctioned entry, every comment caught on camera, every suggestion to move or replace things I had selected with intention. I saved screenshots of texts, voice memos, Even the group email thread my sister forwarded to me by accident. They were planning a guest list that included more than 200 people, most of whom I'd never met. The Garretts, as it turned out, were treating this event like a soft launch for their political ambitions. The house fits the tone. One message read, "Elegant but digestible. It makes us look connected to the creative class." I closed the email and stared at the screen for a while. I wasn't even angry. I was numb in the way people become when the same story keeps playing. At dinner that Friday, my father casually mentioned that the garage would need to be cleared for valet staff, and your office, he added between sips of wine, will work better as a prep kitchen for the caterers. It has the right access to the garden. I didn't say anything. I just looked at him and thought about how easily entitlement had replaced conversation in our family. Aubrey was glowing that night, talking about honeymoon plans and bridesmaid fittings. My mother kept adjusting her place cards and talking about theme palettes. No one asked what I had been working on, how my firm was doing, or whether I even wanted to be part of any of this. The more invisible I became, the clearer the path felt. That night, I texted Miles accept the higher offer. Let's close as soon as possible. He confirmed everything by noon the next day. Closing was set for 5 days before the party. Documents would arrive Monday. The buyer was thrilled. They didn't need walkthroughs or updates, just access on the agreed date and confirmation that everything would be cleared. I signed the agreement that night and saved a copy to 3 separate folders, one personal, one legal, one psychological. This was no longer just about the house. This was about ending a contract I never agreed to in the first place, the kind written in guilt and sustained by silence. When I returned home that evening, the party planner had left a message. "Hi, Lana. Just confirming that our painters will be arriving Monday morning to prep the living room. We'll also be replacing the chandelier as discussed. Your mother mentioned it wasn't the right tone for the event." I played the message twice, then pressed record on my phone. I turned the camera on the chandelier above me, still unboxed from its storage crate and hanging proudly in the center of the room. This piece was custom-made by a woman-run studio in Vermont. I said into the camera, "They told me it wouldn't fit, that it clashed with the theme. I designed this house to reflect where I came from, not where they wanted to place me." Harper called right as I finished. "You okay?" she asked. "Better than okay," I replied. "I've never been more clear." Then I added, almost to myself, "I'm not burning a bridge. I'm selling the land under it." The final walkthrough with the new owners was scheduled for Tuesday at 9 a.m. I confirmed the time, made a note in my calendar, and told Miles not to post any signage until the day after the engagement party. Discretion wasn't just a preference anymore. It was a strategy. My mother texted me that same morning asking if I would be home Thursday when the caterers came to inspect the kitchen. I stared at the message for a few seconds, then replied simply, "Busy with a client. Leave the key under the planter." I had already changed the locks 2 days prior. Let them try it. Let them walk up in heels in confidence, expecting access, and meet a deadbolt instead. By now, my house was no longer mine in the functional sense, but I moved through it with the calm of someone who had already crossed the finish line. Every time I opened a drawer, I knew what would go and what would stay. Some things, like the brass pepper mill from Florence, or the linen drapes I had hand-dyed myself, I left exactly where they were. They were no longer personal. They had already been stripped of meaning by the hands of decorators and event planners. I chose to let them remain, not as a gift, but as a reminder. A stage needs props, and I had no interest in carrying them into my next life. Harper came over later that night with a pizza and a bottle of cheap wine. She walked into the nearly empty living room and sat on the floor, cross-legged like we used to in college. "So this is really happening," she said, looking around at the clean walls and empty bookshelves. "It already did," I replied. I opened my phone and showed her the latest security footage. My mother in her red cashmere blazer, standing at my front door, fumbling with a key that no longer worked, behind her. The party planner was scrolling through a checklist, clearly irritated. The caterers were standing off to the side, their van idling, uncertain if they were even at the right address. We watched the footage in silence, the same way people watch a magician's trick unfold in slow motion. "You're evil," Harper said finally, half smiling. "No," I answered. "I'm done." I had spent so many years internalizing their judgment, reshaping myself to be more palatable, more useful, more invisible. This wasn't revenge. This was exit. The next morning, I filmed a short video clip walking through the house one last time. I narrated it quietly, not for an audience, but for myself. I spoke about the pieces I had chosen, the corners I had designed for light and calm, the intentions behind each room. It wasn't an apology, it was a record. The same way architects document ruins, not as loss, but as closure. 2 days before the party, my father left me a voicemail. His tone was clipped, professional, almost performative. "Lana, your lack of communication is reflecting poorly on the family. I suggest you cooperate before this becomes unnecessarily complicated." I saved the message, titled the file Evidence 14, and moved on. That evening, I received a second message from Aubrey. This time a barrage of texts that started with the word unbelievable and spiraled into accusations of sabotage and selfishness, apparently. The florist had refused to hang the new flower installation because they couldn't gain access to the living room. The planner had threatened to cancel. The caterers were reconsidering. And yet I said nothing. I turned my phone face down and turned on music instead. Something instrumental, clean, without lyrics trying to tell me how to feel. The house felt light, empty, but not hollow. I sat on the window bench I had built with my own hands 3 years earlier, the one they once called too stark for entertaining, and watched the sun dip below the skyline. This would be the last sunset I'd witness from these windows. I didn't feel grief. I felt precision, like closing the last page of a chapter you finally finished rewriting. The next day, I met the buyers at a cafe downtown to finalize key transfers. They were an older couple, quiet, respectful, and noticeably uninterested in grandeur. They asked thoughtful questions, not about square footage or resale, but about light, insulation, and noise. The wife looked at me and said, "This house has been loved, we can tell." I nodded, not because I agreed, but because I hoped they would treat it better than my own family had. I handed them the keys in a small black box. They thanked me with sincerity I hadn't heard in years. As I walked back to my car, I didn't feel the weight of goodbye. I felt like someone who had mailed back the final piece of a puzzle that never quite fit. The new owners were hosting a small gathering the following week. I'd be long gone by then. I checked the time. The party was tomorrow. The party was scheduled for 4 o'clock sharp. By 3:47, the first luxury car had already pulled up in front of the house. I wasn't there. Of course. I was seated at a rooftop cafe across town, looking down at the city through my sunglasses, while Harper sipped a matcha next to me. Half watching the security camera feed on my phone, the image showed the front walkway of what used to be my home, The flower arch still stood, though it looked slightly crooked. My mother had arrived in a red silk dress, her signature event color, and was pacing in front of the door with visible tension in her jaw. She reached into the planter for the spare key, just as I had predicted, and tried the lock twice before pulling back with a small, stiff laugh that didn't reach her eyes. "They're early," Harper murmured, biting into a biscotti. "Desperate people always are," I said without looking up. The screen flickered, then stabilized, behind my mother. The caterers were unloading trays of champagne flutes onto silver carts, unsure whether they should approach the house yet. A few guests milled around near the sidewalk, checking their phones and squinting at the door like it should have been opened by now. My sister appeared next, hair in perfect waves, arm in arm with Cassian, who looked vaguely annoyed even in formal wear. Aubrey didn't notice the stalled energy right away. She was too busy posing for the event photographer, who had arrived 30 minutes earlier and was already circling the garden like it was a crime scene. Then it happened. The planner approached my mother with an urgent whisper. She gestured toward the house, gesticulating with frustration as she held up her own key. My mother's smile faltered completely. The key didn't work. Again. I leaned back in my chair, crossed one leg over the other, and reached for my iced coffee. "And here we go," I whispered, tapping the screen to record. Harper laughed softly. "Is that Cassian's mom trying to open the garage from her phone?" I didn't answer. I was watching my sister now, her smile melting into a frown, confusion tightening into something close to panic. My phone started buzzing. First my mother, then Aubrey, then a number I didn't recognize. I silenced all of them. The camera feed showed a cluster of confused guests now standing awkwardly on the sidewalk, trying not to make eye contact with each other. One woman in a champagne dress looked toward the catering van like she might ask for a drink early. The florist's truck was double parked, and someone had begun filming. I saw a man in a gray suit tilt his phone sideways and capture a shot of my mother arguing with the planner. Moments later, that photo showed up on social media with the caption, "When the hostess can't get into her own venue." By 4:20, the hashtag had gone viral in Charleston circles. I opened the trending tab just to watch the comments pour in. People guessed what had happened. Some assumed it was poor planning. Others speculated about a family feud. One person commented, "Imagine taking over your daughter's house without asking, then acting shocked when the door doesn't open. Karma in real time." Harper clinked her glass against mine. "You think they'll figure it out tonight?" she asked. "Eventually," I replied. "But by then, it won't matter." The screen lit up again, a voicemail from my father this time. The subject line transcribed automatically, "Fix this immediately." We watched for another 10 minutes, until the crowd began to thin. Some guests left quietly, others lingered for drama. The planner was on the phone, likely calling every contact she could think of. Aubrey stood near the curb, mascara smudged just slightly under one eye, holding her shoes in one hand. My mother had stopped pretending. Her arms were crossed. Her mouth was tight. Her plan had failed, and she knew it. She didn't just lose control of the event. She lost the narrative. And that was always what mattered to her most. I opened my email and started typing, "Dear Mom, Dad, and Aubrey, by now. I assume you've realized the house is no longer yours to use. It never was. I've sold it. The new owners took possession yesterday. Any attempt to enter the property without permission will be recorded and forwarded to legal counsel. Over the last few weeks, I documented every unauthorized entry, every message that dismissed my boundaries, and every decision made without my consent. I'm not angry. I'm done. You asked for access. I asked for respect. You sent florists and photographers. I sent a real estate agent. We are not the same. Enjoy the evening, if that's still possible. Lana. Then I hit send and turned the phone screen face down on the table. By the time I finished my drink, Harper was already scrolling through local news threads and private group chats where the story had spread like wildfire. One post from a wedding planner's assistant simply read, "Never plan an event in a house you don't own." Another had a photo of my mother in front of the locked door, her phone pressed to her ear, frustration seeping through every wrinkle she'd spent years pretending didn't exist. The comments came fast and sharp. Some people made jokes. Others offered praise. A few asked who I was and where they could follow me online. I ignored them all. This wasn't a performance. It was a correction. My phone buzzed again. A new voicemail from Aubrey. This one less angry, more frantic. Her voice cracked as she asked how I could do this to her on the most important day of her life. She said the Garretts were humiliated, that Cassian's mother had left early and wouldn't return calls, that my parents were devastated, and that this wasn't just a party. It was a milestone. I listened without emotion. It was always a milestone for them, for their image, for their illusion of unity, for me. It was just Tuesday, a Tuesday where the locks were mine. The title was signed, and I had finally taken back the space they believed they were entitled to. Later that night, Harper and I moved the last few boxes out of my temporary storage unit into my new place across town. The Victorian was rough around the edges, with a crooked front porch and wallpaper that could drive someone to tears. But the bones were good. The light came through the windows like it belonged there. It smelled like dust and possibility. I stood in the middle of the empty living room, barefoot, and said nothing. There were no florists, no photographers, no event planners, just me, a stack of books, and the echo of my own breath in a space that didn't need to impress anyone. We opened a second bottle of wine and unpacked my grandfather's drafting tools first. Harper lit a candle from a box labeled studio, and the room felt warmer almost instantly. So, what now? She asked. I glanced toward the window, where wind was brushing against the shutters like a gentle knock. Now. I rebuild, I said, not just about the house, but everything, not to prove anything, not for applause, just to remember what it feels like to create something without permission. That night, while brushing my teeth in a half-lit bathroom that still had pink tile from 1962, my phone buzzed again. This time it was from Dean Jordan, my old real estate contact. He had seen the footage, read the online speculation, and simply wrote, "Everything okay on your end?" I replied. "Better than okay." Then I asked about permits for minor exterior work and whether he knew a local contractor who respected creative decisions. He sent me a list within the hour. The same night, someone sent me a message on social media, a woman I didn't know. Her profile picture showed a small baby and a tired smile. Her message was short. My parents used my apartment for years, made me feel like a guest in my own life. What you did today gave me courage. Thank you. I read it 3 times before closing the app. The next morning, the local paper ran a headline that avoided naming names but made the situation unmistakable. Private event collapses. After property ownership dispute. The subtitle was even better. Sources say the house had recently changed hands, but the former family was unaware. I folded the paper with a small, quiet satisfaction. Across the page was a photo of Cassian speaking with a reporter, hands in his pockets, eyes lowered. I had no interest in his version of the story. I had heard it before. From men like him, from fathers like mine, from people who found it easier to blame the difficult daughter than to admit they never really saw her. By Thursday, my parents had posted a carefully worded statement about unexpected maintenance issues and schedule conflicts, along with a vague line about the importance of respecting boundaries. I didn't respond. I didn't post. I didn't explain. When someone hands you a stage you didn't ask for, sometimes the best revenge is to hand it right back empty, quiet, and locked from the inside. I walked through my new kitchen, trailing my fingers along the chip tile. It would take months to restore it fully, but it was mine, all of it, and for the first time in years. No one could take it without asking first. The renovation started quietly. I didn't announce it. I didn't film dramatic before and after montages. I simply got up each morning, pulled my hair back, and started scraping wallpaper. At first, it felt ceremonial. Every inch I tore down was like peeling away someone else's narrative. The pink floral print in the dining room, the heavy drapes that blocked sunlight, the layers of bad paint jobs that covered real wood beneath. It was slow, imperfect, and deeply personal. Some nights I'd stand in the middle of the living room, barefoot again, just breathing in the space. It was dusty, loud, and full of possibility. I started documenting the process, not for validation, but for record. A private journal with photos, voice memos, and handwritten notes. One afternoon, Harper dropped by with iced lattes and asked if I'd consider sharing it publicly. People are invested, she said, not just in what you left behind, but what you're building now. I hesitated. I never liked attention that came without context. But then she said something that stuck with me. This isn't about the party. It's about what happens when a woman stops making room for people who never knock. So, I started uploading. No filters, no trendy music, just quiet footage of what it looked like to reclaim something slowly and deliberately. The videos gained traction faster than I expected, not viral in the loud way, but consistent. Comments came in from women across the country, architects, mothers, caretakers, former daughters. Some told me about homes they were pushed out of. Others talked about reclaiming careers, creative spaces, or just peace of mind. They didn't want drama. They wanted proof that stillness could be powerful, that boundaries didn't need explanation, that you could walk away without slamming the door and still make sure it locked behind you. 2 weeks later, Dean sent me a message. He'd seen one of the renovation clips circulating in design forums. "You've got a following now," he wrote. "Ever think about turning this into something more?" I thought about it that night, walking through the unfinished kitchen with bare feet on concrete. Maybe there was something here worth building. Not just a physical home, but a space that gave others permission to step out of roles they were tired of performing. Maybe that was the real structure I was meant to restore. Not wood, but worth. I didn't hear from my parents for a while, which in itself was louder than words. Then one afternoon, a letter arrived, handwritten, no return address. But I recognized my mother's handwriting instantly. It was 4 pages long, neatly written, measured, and entirely without apology. She spoke of pain, of betrayal, of appearances shattered. She said I had embarrassed the family, that what I did would take years to forget, maybe longer to forgive. But what stood out most wasn't what she said. It was what she didn't. Not once did she ask how I felt in that house. Not once did she acknowledge the way they used my name, when it was convenient and erased it when it wasn't. I folded the letter and placed it in a folder I had labeled receipts, alongside old emails, contracts, texts, and screen captures. I didn't need them anymore, but I kept them like you keep blueprints of a house you've already rebuilt. A reminder of the structure that used to exist and why it failed. That weekend, I hosted a small gathering, just a few people, no dress code, no pressure. We sat on the front porch, drinking wine from mismatched glasses and eating off paper plates while the new pendant light above the entry flickered gently in the breeze. It was the opposite of curated, and it felt more real than any holiday dinner I'd had in the last decade. Harper looked around and said, "You know, this place still has your name all over it, even though it's not trying so hard." I nodded. She was right. My work had always been about shaping spaces that reflect what's true, not what's expected. That night, I sat down at my desk and opened a blank document. At the top, I typed "reclaiming space." It wasn't a business plan. It wasn't a memoir. It was something in between. A new chapter. A platform. Maybe. A series. A blueprint for women like me who were tired of holding their breath in homes they weren't allowed to own emotionally. And in that moment, I realized something simple but transformative. I wasn't angry anymore. Not at them. Not even at myself. I was just ready. A few days later, I found myself sitting at the same cafe where I had met Miles for the first listing appointment. This time, I wasn't here for strategy or escape. I was waiting to meet a local builder who specialized in restoring historical homes without stripping them of their soul. He arrived early, a quiet man with paint on his boots and sketches rolled under his arm. We spoke for over an hour, not about budgets or square footage, but about light, lines, and respect for a house's original bones. By the time we finished, I knew I had found someone who didn't need to be convinced that intention matters more than appearance. When he left, I stayed at the table and opened my notebook, where I had started outlining a series of articles under the same name I had typed the week before reclaiming space. Later that night, I posted a photo of the hallway I had just finished sanding. Nothing dramatic, just soft shadows, worn wood, and a line of light creeping across the floor from a half-open window. I wrote 3 sentences under it. This hallway used to feel narrow. Now it feels honest. Sometimes space only breathes when no one's watching. The comment section filled slowly. Some people asked for tips. Others shared their own before and after stories, not just of homes, but of decisions, of departures, of return. The thread felt less like a feed and more like a quiet conversation between strangers who finally had language for what they'd carried. The next day, Harper sent me a photo someone had shared online. It was a shot of my old house, now with a new mailbox, a different number plate, and a subtle change in landscaping. There was no party, no drama, just an ordinary day on an ordinary street. "You did it," she wrote. I looked at the image for a long time. It felt like looking at a childhood photo of someone I once loved, but no longer needed. Not because the house didn't matter, but because I no longer needed it to prove anything. It had served its purpose. It held the version of me that fought for space. This one built it. That weekend, I got a call from an unknown number. I almost didn't pick up, but something told me to answer. It was Cashin. His voice was quiet, heavier than I remembered. He didn't ask for anything. He just said he wanted to say that he saw what had happened and that he understood now. It's been chaos. He admitted. They're blaming each other. but none of them are asking why you really left, only how you dared to do it. I didn't say much. There was nothing left to explain. Then, before he hung up, he added something that caught me off guard. "I think she's scared," he said. "Aubrey, she's realizing that what she's building doesn't have a foundation, not like yours." I let that sit in silence, then told him gently that fear has a purpose too, when it's not used to control someone else. That evening, I returned to my new kitchen and stared at the half-primed wall I'd been putting off painting. I wasn't sure what color it would become yet, but for once I wasn't rushing to decide. Some choices deserved stillness. Not every change had to be loud. Some could arrive like quiet waves brushing against a shoreline that had survived years of storms. I thought about all the versions of myself that had walked through kitchens designed for other people. This one would be different. It wouldn't be efficient. It wouldn't be perfect. It would be mine. By the end of the month, I had submitted the first essay for a magazine that had reached out after reading my posts. It wasn't about real estate or renovation. It was about the concept of inherited silence. How families sometimes confuse closeness with control. How absence can be a form of loyalty when presence means erasing yourself. They accepted the piece without edits. When I saw it published online, I didn't feel proud. I felt precise, like the final nail in a structure you know will hold, even when the weather turns again. That night, Harper and I sat on the front steps of my now painted porch, drinking tea and watching the street lamp flicker over the sycamore trees. We didn't talk about the past. We didn't mention the party. We just listened to the quiet and let the night unfold. And when she finally turned to me and said, "You really aren't angry anymore, are you?" I looked up at the house and replied, "No, I'm just finally not waiting for someone to give me permission to leave the door closed." A few weeks after the article went live, I stood in my hallway with one hand on the finished door frame and realized I hadn't thought about the old house all week. It hadn't crossed my mind once, not the party, not the red dress, not the key that didn't turn. It wasn't avoidance, it was absence, the kind that feels earned. That morning I had installed the final light fixture in the guest room, a simple frosted pendant that cast a soft glow across the newly painted ceiling. As I stepped back to take in the space, my phone buzzed. It was from a name I hadn't seen in a long time. Aubrey. Just a message. No punctuation. No demands. It read, "I'm still not sure how you did it." I didn't answer, because I wasn't sure either. I only knew that when the moment came to choose between performance and peace, I chose the one that didn't need an audience. Later that evening, I met Harper for a late dinner at a small wine bar tucked behind a bookstore. We sat outside under a string of warm lights, the kind that made everything feel a little softer. She brought a bottle of Rioja and a manila folder filled with scribbled ideas for what reclaiming space could become next. A workshop, maybe, a column, a design residency for women rebuilding from scratch. I listened without interrupting, letting her excitement fill the air. I wasn't sure where it was headed, but I wasn't afraid of it anymore, for the first time. The future didn't feel like something I had to guard against. It felt like an open doorway I had already walked through without needing to slam anything behind me. When I got home that night, I passed through each room slowly, turning off lights one by one. The house was quiet, the kind of quiet that doesn't echo, just holds. I stopped in the kitchen and ran my fingers across the tiled backsplash I had chosen 3 weeks earlier, a muted green that reminded me of sea glass. It wasn't trendy, it wasn't aspirational, it was just calm. I opened the window above the sink and stood still for a long while, listening to the wind move through the oak trees lining the street. There was no event happening, No guests arriving, no one evaluating the lighting, just air, just branches, just space. The next morning, I received a handwritten letter in the mail, no name, no return address, but I recognized my mother's handwriting before I opened the envelope. The paper was thick, the ink slightly smudged in places. The letter was long but didn't say much. Words like disappointment, embarrassment, family loyalty floated between the lines. She never used the word sorry, not once. What stayed with me was the final sentence. We raised you to understand the importance of legacy. I hope one day you'll see that. I folded the letter carefully, placed it inside a folder labeled Keep, and didn't think about it again for days. That weekend, I finished refinishing the stairs. It had taken longer than expected, mostly because I kept stopping to admire the natural grain of the wood beneath the years of lacquer and neglect. With each pass of the sander, something buried revealed itself. Not perfect, not flawless, just visible, honest. I didn't stain it. I let the wood speak in its own tone. When I stepped back and looked at the stairs leading up to the rooms I had spent months reshaping, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Not pride, not even relief, just wholeness. Like the structure around me finally matched the one I had spent a lifetime building quietly inside. I took a photo of the stairs at golden hour. When the light came in just right through the west-facing window, I posted it with a short caption, "Built for weight, reclaimed for rest." Within an hour, comments poured in. Some praised the craftsmanship. Others spoke of lives they were quietly restoring in parallel. One woman wrote, "Sometimes I still feel like a guest in my own story. Thank you for showing me it's okay to change the locks." I reread that line 5 times, not because I needed validation, but because I knew exactly what she meant. That evening, Harper stopped by unannounced with a bottle of orange wine and 2 paintbrushes. We painted the back fence in near silence. Working by the light of a single bulb hung from a clothesline, when we finished, we sat on the back steps, arms flecked with dried paint, watching the color shift in the low light. She asked me if I'd ever open the door again to the people who once walked through without asking. I thought for a moment, then said softly, "Maybe, but they'd have to knock first." She didn't respond. She just passed me the bottle, and we sat there a little longer. 2 women on a porch that didn't need to be big to feel full. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of rain tapping against the roof. I brewed coffee, opened the windows, and let the scent of wet earth and lavender drift through the house. It was Sunday. Nothing was scheduled. No one needed anything from me. The silence didn't feel empty. It felt earned. I picked up my journal and wrote 1 line before the ink even settled. This is the first home I've ever lived in that doesn't require my absence to feel peaceful. And maybe that's the real difference between a house you decorate for others and a home you build for yourself.